నమస్తే మన టీవీ స్పెషల్ ప్రోగ్రామ్ కి స్వాగతం. ఈ రోజు మనం ఆర్ట్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ లో మోడర్న్ ఆర్ట్ ఇన్ ఇండియా గురించి తెలుసుకోబోతున్నాం. అందులో ఇవాల్టి టాపిక్ వచ్చి ప్రోగ్రెసివ్ ఆర్టిస్ట్ గ్రూప్. అసలు ఈ గ్రూప్స్ ఎక్కడ స్టార్ట్ అయ్యాయి మన ఇండియాలో, ఎందుకు, ఎలా స్టార్ట్ అయ్యాయి, వాటి ఉద్దేశం ఏంటి, అవి ఇండియన్ మోడర్న్ ఆర్ట్ పైన ఏ విధంగా ప్రభావం చూపించింది, మన కల్చర్ అనేది, ఇటువంటి విషయాలన్నిటిపైన మనకు అవగాహన కల్పించడానికి మనతో ఉన్నారు గెస్ట్. నమస్తే అండి.
నమస్తే.
సో మీరు పెన్ నేమ్ ఒకటి పెట్టారు, అంటే నార్మల్ నేమ్ ఒకటి పెట్టారు. సో ఏ నేమ్ తో పిలవాలి అనేది చెప్తే నేను సంతోష్. ఓకే, సో సంతోష్ గారు, ఇవాళ మనం ప్రోగ్రెసివ్ ఆర్టిస్ట్ గ్రూప్స్ గురించి తెలుసుకోబోతున్నాం. అయితే ఈ గ్రూప్స్ అనేవి ఎలా స్టార్ట్ అయ్యాయి, వాటి ఉద్దేశం ఏంటి, అసలు ఎందుకు, ఎక్కడెక్కడ స్టార్ట్ అయ్యాయి ఇండియాలో, ఒకసారి ఎక్స్ప్లెయిన్ చేయండి.
There are 4 groups in India, progressive artist groups.
Okay.
So they started in 1940s. 1940s in India is a very important decade, right? 1947 we got independence. So 1940s is the decade of heights of political activism, heights of radical movements in terms of protests, in terms of social awareness, in terms of awareness about the political empowerment, about having freedom, and all these, this environment, this particular context is very important when we look at the progressive artist groups. So there are 4 progressive artist groups in India which formed in the 40s. First, it formed in Calcutta, 1943. We'll see that. So Calcutta Progressive Artist Group started in 43 and it lived for a decade. 53 up to 53, and Madras Progressive Painters Association, it was called Madras Progressive Painters Association, and it was started in 1944, and you can see these two are started before independence, right? And in 1947 a group of artists came together and formed Bombay Progressive Artist Group. So this Bombay Progressive Artist Group was very much influenced by the Calcutta Group of artists, because there was an exhibition in Bombay, of Calcutta Group artists. So seeing that, the Bombay artists thought, some of them thought, that why shouldn't we come together and form a group like this in the progressive ideology. Here we need to understand what is progressive, why they call themselves as progressive, because till then, and we have seen in 2-3 discussions, last 2-3 discussions, where modern artists were looking back into tradition for the influences, right? Abanindranath Tagore, Amrita Shergill, you take Ravi Verma if you go long back. Even Jamini Roy was also looking at the living tradition of the India, of the present India, right? So it was always these artists to kind of prepare a language, to kind of represent modern art, or to kind of represent their own ideas about modern art. They have looked back into tradition, right? Both in terms of the pictorial language. For example, Abanindranath has taken the pictorial language, the painterly language, the visual language, the composition, color, and all those he had taken from the miniatures, right? And Amrita Shergill also had taken some of her elements of representation from Ajanta and miniatures. So these artists, these group of artists, thought that if we want to be progressive, if we have to be progressive, because it is at that time, 1940s, the movement was to go forward, right? Progressive means going forward, right? So they thought all these artists and all the modern art till then looked back into history, looked back into the tradition, and did not look forward. So they thought we will look forward. Okay, so to look forward, they looked at the Western modernism. Here is the twist, right? How and what they sort of created in their art practice, what kind of images that they created, and why they were influenced or why they thought those images, those ways of representation important, for the progressive movement, for the progressive understanding to move forward. So before going into what kind of influences, what kind of images they took, we should look at, for a little while, we should look at the 1940s, 1930s, what was happening in India. 1930s and 40s was the movement of heights of socialism, the consciousness of socialism. The communist parties were very active. The artists, intellectuals, writers were very much influenced by the communist ideology. So unlike the earlier artists, Abanindranath Tagore, Ravi Verma, Amrita Shergill, who belonged to aristocratic families, who belonged to the upper class families, well versed families, the artists in the 40s were belonging to the lower classes, right? So they were responding, they were inspired by the communist ideology, inspired by the socialist ideology, and they thought we should look forward, we should go forward, we should, Indian modern art should go forward and should not look backward, right? And we should represent the reality of India. That is another important point about the progressive artist groups. We have to represent the Indian reality, the present reality of India, and not the past, not something that existed in the past. So this is the basic kind of a premise. We can see progressive artist groups have come together, formed a group, and forming a group, coming together and forming a group also happened at this point of time. Before this, artists came together and worked in different ways, but coming together with a particular kind of ideology, with a particular kind of principles, that we will work under these principles, we will represent the reality of the Indian society, the common man. These are the ideas, So the coming together as a group, you see, it is again a socialist kind of a practice, society, social, not the individual, but the social. Individuals are coming together as a community, This is the kind of an ideology, this is the kind of an emotion, it is a kind of a practice. So this is very important, which is very new at that point of time. And this, in the context of art, was influenced by the literary movements that were happening, by the theatre movements that were happening. In Calcutta, there was a theatre group called IPTA, and I'm sure you all know IPTA, Indian Theatres People's Association, right? IPTA was very active at that point of time, propagating socialist and communist ideas, and criticizing various social forms, forms of social structure. So this was the movement, and the artists, the visual artists, had been very much influenced by these existing literary movements, and they were, of course, friends of writers and poets. So this is the situation. So for visual references, so Bombay 1947, it is the year of independence, right? 1947 December they have formed, right? And at a later point, you have something called Delhi Shilpa Chakra got formulated in Delhi. And little information about Delhi Shilpa Chakra. Delhi Shilpa Chakra comprised of the artist group which came from different regions, and different regions means after partition, many of the artists who were living in Pakistan, then there was no Pakistan, but many artists who were living in the regions of Pakistan, they migrated to Delhi. Okay, so migration, dislocation of your home, you are going to you are dislocating yourself, and the violence of partition, right? Partition and independence is remarked, is remembered with the images of violence, and these artists have seen that violence, okay, of communal riots, of partition violence. So some artists who migrated from Pakistan and some artists who were in and around Delhi, they came together and formed a group called Delhi Shilpa Chakra, and it existed till 1960s. So when we look at progressive artist groups, we have to understand that they are coming from different social classes, which was not the case before, when people were, practicing visual art at a kind of a representative level. You have progressive artists coming from a different social groups and bringing different experiences. So when we look at paintings, we will see different kinds of expressions and different kinds of experiences come. So we'll start with Calcutta Group. Okay, Calcutta Group, you have these names: Pradosh Dasgupta, Kamala Dasgupta, Gopal Ghosh, Nirod Majumdar, Paritosh Sen, and Shubha Thakur. So apart from these artists, you have, it was a sort of a porous group where some of the artists would move away at a later point of time, some other new artists would join in the group. So it was sort of a porous group. And if you look at the artworks, this is Pradosh Dasgupta. He was a sculptor. He did sculpture largely. And this is one of the examples on your screen, the slide called Bondage, 1943. And it is, bondage means it is about a particular class. It is about a class which is always in bondage with the system. That was the idea. It is not about one particular figure, but here the figure is representing a particular group of people, a particular class of people, a particular, if we can take an example, it is the class of people who always work, the labor class. They are the class which constantly work, so they are bonded with the necessity of work. They have to work, right? So it's that kind of a bondage that he is trying to represent here. And the figure is very muscular, because the workers, the laborers, would have a more muscular, a pronounced muscular body, but the figure looks very helpless here. He is not able to do anything. So this shows a particular reality that existed at that point of time, right? And the quote that you see on your screen, "Man is supreme and there is none above him." This is the principle. This was the motto of this group. So man and man's suffering, man's experiences, and man's progress. Who will progress? It is the man. The idea of walking forward is the idea of progress. So it is the progress of man. So man becomes a very important figure here. This is another sculpture by Pradosh Dasgupta, and its title is very interesting, Jhint. This is later casted in bronze. So you see, it's very obvious, it is procession, right? It is the procession, protest procession maybe, or the procession of celebration. And this is the kind of scenes that you got to see at that point of time, both the celebration as well as the protest, the political protest. So this is a kind of a group. And if you look at the way he is modeling the figures, it is very minimalistic, what we call minimalistic. Minimalistic means giving lesser number of details. There are not many details. The faces are not very, detailedly represented. They are marked with small incisions, right? So the treatment is very minimalistic. And Pradosh Dasgupta, from his early days to later days, you see he removes those details and he becomes more and more abstract. And at a later point of time, he becomes more philosophical, where he got inspiration from the form of egg. Egg is understood philosophically, where egg is the origin of world or the origin of life. So egg is also very geometric, a form, right? Elliptical form. So he took egg as an inspirational form, and he used egg shape in creating his sculptures, and this is one of the examples of that phase of his work, right? So you see egg shape is very much visible here. This is another artist, and Govardhan Ash. Govardhan Ash joined later, at a later point of time, and he largely painted in watercolors. 1943, this particular, and this is 1943. If you know the history of India, 1943 was a huge famine in Bengal. Bengal faced a massive famine where people died on the streets of Calcutta. People literally died, and the famine was created. Famine was not natural; it was man-made, because that was the time of war. So the grains, the food grains, were diverted from this region to the soldiers who were fighting the Japanese army. So all the food grains were diverted, and whatever food grains that were existing in the Bengal region, they were locked up by these landlords. They were locked up by the greedy business people, so that they can sell them high cost. So because of this greed of the Indian zamindars or landlords or businessmen, as well as the the colonial administration's choice to divert the food grains to the soldiers, the people died. And many artists, many writers and many artists have represented this, and this is one of the examples where you see the figures are thin, they are emaciating, they are going to die, and there are many examples where people have died, and you can see. So again, here artists are responding to the reality in the present, and they are showing what is happening, and in a way which is very different from Jamni Roy, which is very different from Abanindranath Tagore, because here the painting is done in a more abstract treatment. They are not, Govardhan Ash is not representing the figures in their clear outline, but it's more rough. That if you look at the tree, or if you look at the hut at the back, the hut is not entirely clear. The tree is not painted in the detail, right? But you get the sense of the tree, but you get the experience of this sadness that is there, that people experience. Sorry. This is another artist. We will see 1-2 artworks from each artist. So this is Paritosh Sen. Paritosh Sen again had an interesting experience, and if you know, during partition, during independence, some of the people from East Bengal chose to migrate to Bengal, West Bengal. So Paritosh Sen experienced this migration, and he saw people's pain. He witnessed people's pain during this migration, and how the migrated people becomes refugees, right? And we have in India, we have a lot of refugees, and throughout the world now we can see the refugee problem people are facing. So this is one of the examples represented by Paritosh Sen, and this looks like a train compartment where people are sleeping on either sides, and you have people standing, and if you look at their expression, they are very agonized, right? They are very sad. So this is another reality. Famine is one reality. So artists are responding to these realities, and later Paritosh Sen moves into this kind of a personalized language, like you have seen Pradosh Dasgupta. He moves into a sort of a personalized abstract language. Paritosh Sen also kind of evolves this kind of a language where he makes the figure elongated. As you can see here, the figure looks little elongated, as if it is stretched. It is not proper, doesn't look proper, but that is the choice of the artist. And you don't see the round modeling of the shapes of the hands and legs and body. The hands and legs and body looks flat, and the outline, the drawing is more emphasized. And the idea of painting being flat is something that comes from the modern Western art, and we'll look at it more in detail little later as we go ahead. This is another artist, Gopal Ghosh. Gopal Ghosh is an example where he did not respond to the reality, the social reality. He was painting landscapes, and he painted landscapes throughout, and this is one of the examples, bright, very swift, very quick kind of landscapes with visible brush strokes, very bold colors, right, and looks happy. It is very different from the sad reality that was existing at that point of time, but it looks happy, and maybe this is the celebration of freedom, right, celebration of independence, 1947, and he continued doing this, and he was influenced by movements in the West called Fauvism, Expressionism, and all these progressive artists groups have taken influences from the Western movements, and I will spend little more time on this question of Western movements when we move to Bombay Group, because that is more evident over there, right. So before going to Bombay, we have Madras, because chronologically Madras Progressive Painters Association comes before 1944. So you have many artists, and I have brought few here, few names, and KCS Panikker is the founder, mentor, actually founder member as well as the mentor. So he was the teacher of all these artists that you are seeing on the screen, because he joined as a principal of Government College of Art, Madras, right. To just mention, I think I mentioned before also, but to again remind you, there are 4 government colleges of art in 4 colonial cities. Okay, first Calcutta, then Chennai, which is Chennai now, Madras, then Bombay, and then later in the 1870s Lahore. Okay, so in Madras, Panikker became in 1954. He became the principal of Government College of Art, and under his training, under his mentorship, you have many students passed out from that college. So all his students and himself came together and formed this group called Madras Progressive Painters Association, right. So Panikker was an interesting sorry, artist. He he belonged to Kerala. He belonged to Kerala, and he comes to Madras, and later he joins Government College of Art, Art and Craft in Madras as a student, and he studied art over there, and then later he became a teacher and then principal over there. So this is one of his paintings, early paintings, when he was learning, when he was a student. He was not yet a teacher. So this is a watercolor. It's simple. It shows a sort of a countryside. It's called quayside, where people are sitting. You have boats in the front. It looks like a Kerala village landscape, right. It looks calm, serene, nothing disturbed about it, right. And he moves into something like this. So around 1 decade of time, and you see there is a lot of change in his ways of painting. So what happens is, in the 1950s, in the 1954 to 1957, he went to London, he went to Germany, and then he exhibited in the cities in Europe, London particularly, and Germany, Berlin. So the kind of paintings that he exhibited over there, and this is a very important criticism that he faced, he was asked by the critics over there that whatever we are seeing of your painting, we already know, we already see here. What is new about it? What are you showing new to us? India has a rich tradition of culture, of Buddhism, different religions, religious forms, and the most ancient religion is Buddhism. And what are you showing? I mean, you are showing what we already know. Because why this criticism came? Because Panikker, like other progressive artists, was almost taking references, taking influences, taking the ways and manners of painting from the West, from the 20th century West, from the Western modern art, right? So there are movements like Cubism, Futurism, Fauvism, Expressionism, and Surrealism, and various other movements, art movements were happening in Europe, in different cities in Europe. And Paris was the center of that artistic movements. So these artists in the progressive groups, they were directly taking influences from these art movements, Cubism, Futurism, Fauvism, Expressionism. So they were painting like the Western painters, right? So being an Indian, I mean living in India and experiencing certain kind of cultural and traditional forms, if you are painting in the Western manner, the critics in the West asked, when Panikker displayed his works, the critics in the West asked that, in London asked that, what is the new in your painting? You have to show what you experience, what is Indian about it. So he was asked these questions. So after that he got this in his head, that this question, okay, what is new about me, or what is my identity? The question of identity is again asked. The question of Indian identity is newly addressed at this point of time. The questions of Indian identity always existed, right? What is India? What is Indian culture? How to represent Indian culture, right? The greatness of Indian culture. And from Ravi Verma onwards, you see artists have tried to represent Indian culture, Indian tradition, and Indian art, taking references from Indian art. But what happened at this point of time in the post-independence, they had a new question in front of them. What is the identity of me as an artist, and an artist who comes from India, right? So there is also this figure of me, the artist. Before that, artists didn't quite think about I, the figure of me. So progressive artists also had to address this question of the individual identity in relation to the Indian identity. This is a very crucial point. The individual identity as an artist, but an artist coming from India which has a rich tradition. So after these questions, and after he came back to India, Panikker looked at different mural paintings in South India, right? He looked at different miniature paintings and different traditional arts of India. So this particular painting that you see is something that he painted after taking influences from the murals, the temple murals in South India. So which is why you see the head is big, the body is small. If you look at the face, the way the face is painted, it looks very closer to what you see in, for example, the Lepakshi paintings or the Sitanavasal paintings. So he took influences from those paintings, and then he sort of used them in his own individual visual language. This is little later, where we all know this, this is called words and symbols. We all know this, the horoscope drawings, the Indian horoscope drawings, where the stars are, where the moons are, in your chart, in your birth chart and horoscope and all. So he took forms, he took the formal elements from the horoscope drawings, and he evolved, he developed this particular series called words and symbols. Okay, so the kind of figures, the kind of form that you see, the text that you see, it is very much close to what you see in the horoscope drawings. But these forms and figures and the text does not have any meaning as such. It is very much formal, right? And again, this particular form of horoscope and the birth chart and all, it is very much a practice that existed in the Indian social fabric, in the Indian Brahminical tradition, right? So he took that and he developed a series called Words and Symbols in the 1970s. And you can see from 1948, that first watercolor painting, to this, how he moved with the influences of the idea of Indian art, the idea of Indian tradition, and the idea of the identity of India. And likewise, this is another artist called Munuswamy, who was influenced directly from Panikker, and this is one of the paintings where it looks very abstract, right? Even this has elements of abstraction, and similarly this has, he moved into more and more abstract ways of painting where you have color, lines, and when you look at it, you don't have any form. You don't have a bird, you don't have a tree, you don't have a river, you don't have a house, you don't have a human figure, but all the way the painting is done, it creates a sense of sensation, a kind of emotion, a kind of, if you can spend time on it, if you look at it and then see what you feel, which I was talking yesterday, where the responsibility of the viewer is also very important when it comes to modern art, right? You as a viewer should be able to see what you can see in it, right? So that is something that abstract art allows you to do. And this is a sculptor, again a student of Panikker. He is called Janakiram, and he is a very interesting sculptor who used a technique, a very indigenous technique, which is very different from the conventional sculpture, which is very different from how sculptures are made. Okay, this technique, if you know, is used for covering the stone deities, deities carved in stone. For example, you see the Tirupati Gopuram is entirely covered with gold, foil, gold. So that is the technique, so that is, it's called Kavacha technique. It's called Kavacha tradition. So this artist learned the ways of using the copper and brass sheets. Well, for Tirupati they used gold, but this artist has used copper and brass and created forms like this. So this is a technique he learned from the local tradition. Okay, it is not coming from the Europe, from the European tradition, but it is coming from the local tradition. And in the 60s and 70s, this is another example, Christ. In the 60s and 70s, artists have learned from the local traditions, because local crafts, because that is where the Indian life exists. That is where the identity of India exists. So that is how people thought. Nanda Gopal was a student again of Janakiram. He learned from Janakiram, and this is, as you can see, Krishna, and very interesting, he used copper and brass and he made it more elaborate. So this is basically Krishna surrounded by cows, and when he's playing the flute, right? So, but he has combined all that, he has combined cows, Krishna, and a sense of landscape within one sculpture, by using welding and other ways of joining them. This is another, again, student of Panikker, Reddappa Naidu, and the colors might remind us, of the kind of Magoo and Rangoli and the floral decoration, and Aluku, the Jaju Rangu and white. He has taken things from these everyday practices and folk deities. The deity looks very much like a folkish deity. Maybe you might have a temple right at the at your village, right at the outside of the village, and you look at the temple, you pray the deity and go inside the village. So he has taken forms, inspiration from those practices, the folk practices. So another point one needs to keep in mind is, when the progressive artists grew into 60s and 70s, they started taking inspiration and influences from the local crafts, from the local traditions, from the local ways of creating art, right? So we'll move now to Bombay Progressive Group, okay, and maybe you might have heard this name called M.F. Hussain. He is a a popular artist who belonged to this group, and you have F.N. Souza, Francis Newton Souza. Souza was the leader founder. He was the force behind the founding of this group. And Syed Haider Raza, Krishna Howlerji Ara. Ara is the artist who moved from our place, Secunderabad, Bolaram, to Bombay. Ambadas Gade and Sadanand Bhakre. Okay, we'll look at some 3-4 artists today. I mean, we can't go on looking at all the artists. So first, let's look at M.F. Hussain. He was born in Maharashtra, Pandharpur, 1915. Okay, and then he started practicing calligraphy. That's how he started using brush, and that's how he started using ink and nib. So it is that actually triggered a sort of an interest in art, calligraphic practice. Then later he spent some time in Baroda with his uncle in Madras and practiced calligraphy. So after few years, when he was 2 years, his mother died. So you see, he had to struggle from the very early age. Okay, so he moved to Bombay, and he had worked different kinds of things. He had to survive and to earn bread and butter. He had worked all kinds of things, and he started painting billboards, and this is where his career started. The billboards as well as the Bollywood posters. And before the digital age, Bollywood posters and cinema posters were painted by hand, and artists used to paint them, and they were huge, some 10 meters to 5 meters, 12 meters to 6 meters, or they were huge paintings, and he used to paint them, and with very fine skill and realism. So that amount of skill and realism that he cultivated in during this phase of cinema hoarding paintings, Bollywood cinema hoarding paintings, he was recognized by F.N. Souza, then suggested him to join J.J. School of Art. This is one of the art schools established during the colonial times. Jamshedji Jijibai Art and Crafts School in Bombay. Okay, so which is called J.J. School, and which is famous. So he sort of learns from J.J. School, and also he learns from the artists that he was surrounded by. And when he displayed his works in 1947 in Bombay Art Society, okay, and like Hyderabad Art Society, which was a very later establishment, Bombay Art Society was established long back in the 1860s. So Bombay Art Society used to conduct annual exhibitions, okay, like Hyderabad Art Society doesn't, like other art societies do. So in so he participated in 1947, and his works were really appreciated. And Souza, F.N. Souza, saw his works, and he invited him and proposed him that we can come together and make a group. And Souza is an interesting artist. We'll look at Souza a little later. So Hussain, a Muslim, right? And Bombay Group, progressive group, has this combination of different communal artists coming from different communities, right? So Hussain is a Muslim. Souza was a Christian. Ara was a Dalit. Gade, Bakre, and other artists who belong to the lower classes of the society. They came together. So Hussain was proposed by Souza to kind of join a group, and Hussain agrees, and they came together and they asked other artists to form a group. So this is how it started in 1947, when they sat together in Bombay Art Society and they discussed it. So there was a meeting on 9th December 1947, and that meeting led to the formation of the group. Okay, so Hussain was very much influenced from the Western art movement that I was mentioning, and Cubism was something that really influenced him apart from Fauvism. And along with Cubism and Fauvism, he incorporated Indian mythology and culture, and we can see that when we look at the slides. Hussain, and which is why there was a lot of controversy in the 2000s and later, where he was thrown out of the country, he was pushed to the corner to run away from the country, because he was painting Indian mythology, mythological themes. So there was a lot of controversy. But before the controversy, he really contributed to the imagination of, or reimagination of Indian mythology through his paintings, right? So he was not only a painter; he also produced a film, several films actually. So, but one of the very early and important film is Through the Painter's Eye, or Through the Eyes of a Painter, 1967, so which got an award also. So it was a very modernist, one can call a modernist film, unlike the later films. This is one of his works, a painting called Tonga, right? So it has a sense of, so if you look at the colors are quite bright, right? And what you see here is colors are applied in a flat manner. If you look at the horse, you don't see the roundness of horse, you don't see the volume of horse, right? Horse is drawn with outline and then he painted it, he filled it, but the way he is filling the colors, it is more flat, it is more like making the horse look flat. So if you look at the entire painting, you see this sense of flatness sort of is there throughout. You can't go beyond it, you can't go behind, whatever is there, it is there on the surface of the painting. There is nothing like you go beyond and behind there is a tree or there is a river, like Ravi Verma, for example, like Abanindranath Tagore, or like Shergill, where there is a space behind. No, there is no space behind. Whatever is there, it is there in front of you. And this logic is flat painting, painting as a two-dimensional surface which is flat. This is the logic of modernist painting, and this is taken by the progressive artists. They have adopted the modernist pictorial logic, painterly logic, and apart from the flatness, the application of colors, the kind of abstraction, it is semi-abstract. It is called semi-abstract because it is not entirely abstract, it is not entirely realistic. It is somewhere between, which is why it is called semi-abstract. Okay, and influences of expressionism and fauvism we can see here, right? So this is a little later painting, 1958, and what the theme is women at work, right? Women at work, again the concept of work, the idea of work, the Tonga also, the Tonga driver, woman at work, and the condition of woman and her work. And even here you see, look at the way her white drapery is painted, it looks flat, okay, there is no modeling. Look at the way the figure is painted, and the background is also flat. So it is the kind of language of painting, the point that I was mentioning yesterday, where the artist allows you to see, and you develop your own sensibilities, you develop your own sensation, your own understanding about painting. So here Hussain uses a bold line, as you can see, the black line, the bold line, and with the bold line he sort of very manneristically, in a particular manner, he creates this figure. Okay, and you look at any Hussain's work, you can see a particular personalized individual language. Okay, and this is important for the modern artist. How do you create a personal individual language? Because within that personal individual language, your own temperaments, you as a human being, you as a sensitive, sensible artist, comes through your language. Okay, not always the theme, but how the theme comes through your painting, the way you paint it. So this is another famous painting by him, between the spider and the lamp. Okay, even here you can see the kind of flat arrangement. You have the painting is divided into 3 registers, 3 zones. Top, in the middle you have the figures. Okay, so it is about the woman. It is about, you know, the spider. Spider has looks like it implies a sort of a superstitious insertion, and you have lamp. Okay, so he continues to use lamp as a symbolic element in his work. Lamp as a sense of light, as a sense of, you know, enlightenment. Hussain is famous for his horses, right? He painted many horses, paintings where you have horses, and very forceful horses. He identified horse with speed and force, and you see this is an example of his of this series of horses, and you can get a sense of movement, a sense of animation, a sense of speed. You know, horses are moving in all directions, and you know that force is there, and that force is not only in the colors. You know, the colors are very brightly applied and very cleverly applied colors. You know, the blue and the yellow, you know, and the red, orange, because blue and yellow are the complementary colors. They are contrast colors, and you have blue on the one side and yellow horse on the other side, and right above the yellow horse you have the round dot, which could be a blue sun or blue moon. It's very interesting, a painting, and the kind of movement that is created within the painting, and the color intensity, and the lines, the bold lines that you see, you know, with which the horses are drawn. The bold lines also, you know, it creates an effect as if they are coming out onto you when you look at it. This is a very important painting called Mahabharata, and you can see the entire Mahabharata is painted in one particular large painting, right? You can see on the right Kauravas, you can see Karuna in the center, Gandhar. Yeah, I'm not able to see clearly, but yeah. And you have, so you have the entire narrative here laid out, right, in different pockets. And when you look at it, you know, what happened to Karna? Karna sitting there, and you have wheel over there and the name Karna, right? And what happened? We know the story. When you look at that particular area, you can connect this to the story that you have in your head, right? So you have a figure on the top, horizontally represented with arrows and all. You know who that figure is, right? So all these, like, it's a very interesting kind of a painting where he uses the figure, and the figure kind of captures the entire story, you know, the entire episode within the story. And it's a very interestingly painted kind of a canvas. And one information one needs to keep in mind, and which is important for us in the context of Hyderabad and Hyderabad modern art. Hussain stayed in Hyderabad in the 60s, and he started drawing Ramayana series. He started his Ramayana series drawings and paintings in Hyderabad. Okay, so Hussain's living in Hyderabad, and he lived in someone called Badri Vishal Pitti, who was his patron. He lived in Hyderabad, and his presence in Hyderabad was very important for the artists who were there in Hyderabad at that point of time. So Hussain's departure and, you know, moving into the religious themes, into the mythological themes, happened in Hyderabad. This is again a controversial, it became controversial later, painting called Bharat Mata. We have seen Bharat Mata by Abanindranath Tagore, where you have a figure, Bharat Mata, a figure standing and holding, almost like Lakshmi, but not Lakshmi. Bharat Mata wearing saffron, holding 4 things in 4 hands. Here Hussain did an entirely different thing. Here the body of Bharat Mata, the figure, the human figure of Bharat Mata is impressed, is mapped, is mixed with the map of India. You see, the figure is composed in such a way it fits into the map of India, right? And you have a chakra in the center, right? Right, the chakra. Where do you see the chakra? Chakra falls in more or less in Odisha now, right? So the Ashoka Chakra, and you have the hills where the Himalayas are, right? And you have the sun rising, and you have the ocean at the bottom, right? So this is a very, very symbolic as well as very abstract in approach.
Okay, so this is all about progressive artist groups in India, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, short break తీసుకుందాం. బ్రేక్ తర్వాత మోడర్న్ ఆర్ట్ ఆఫ్ హైదరాబాద్,
Okay,
మోడర్న్ ఆర్ట్
yeah,
ఇన్ హైదరాబాద్ గురించి డిస్కస్ చేసుకుందాం. షార్ట్ బ్రేక్ తర్వాత మోడర్న్ ఆర్ట్ ఇన్ హైదరాబాద్ గురించి డిస్కస్ చేసుకుందాం. కీప్ వాచింగ్ మన టీవీ.